Imagine an empire built not by warriors, but by marriages. One family, from a lonely castle in the Alps, who rose until half of Europe bowed to their bloodline. For centuries, kings and generals bathed their empires in blood, trying to seize what one family claimed with rings and signatures. A single name became synonymous with crowns, alliances, and power itself: Habsburg. It began humbly, in the cold heart of the Swiss Alps. A family of minor lords, their castle perched on a rocky hill. Habsburg, the Hawk's Castle. They had no armies, no gold, only one thing that mattered more than force: ambition. In 1273, their gamble began to pay off. Rudolf of Habsburg, a shrewd and calculating noble, rose from obscurity to claim the ultimate title: King of the Romans, the elected ruler of the Holy Roman Empire. He was no warrior king like the legends of old. He was a negotiator, a dealer, a man who turned politics into chess. And for the first time, the Habsburg eagle spread its wings. From there, the dynasty built an empire not with swords, but marriages. Their motto became legend: let others wage war. You, happy Austria, marry. While France and England tore each other apart, while the Ottomans stormed across Europe, the Habsburgs wove a web of alliances that would last centuries. A daughter here, a son there, each betrothal a quiet invasion, each wedding a conquest. They didn't need to march their armies across borders. They simply inherited them. The turning point came with Maximilian I. He wasn't just a ruler. He was a strategist who saw marriage as warfare by other means. In 1477, he married Mary of Burgundy, the richest heiress in Europe. Overnight, the Habsburgs gained control of vast lands: Burgundy, Flanders, and the Netherlands. With that union, they became one of the most powerful families in Christendom. Maximilian didn't stop there. He arranged his children's marriages like a general plotting a campaign. His son Philip the Handsome married Joanna of Castile, daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella, the monarchs who had united Spain and funded Columbus. Their marriage would fuse two great worlds, the old and the new. From this union would be born a child who would inherit everything. Europe was changing. The Ottoman Empire loomed from the east, France pressed from the west, and the Reformation simmered beneath the surface. But above it all, the Habsburgs rose like a dynasty blessed by destiny. The chessboard of Europe was theirs. Every king a relative, every crown a potential heirloom. They ruled Austria, Burgundy, the Netherlands, and Spain, without fighting a single major war. It was power built not on bloodshed, but on the quiet cruelty of inheritance. By the early 16th century, one young man stood at the center of this empire: Charles, grandson of Maximilian and son of Philip and Joanna. He was barely 16 when his father died, and with his father's death, the impossible happened. In a single stroke, Charles inherited Austria, Spain, the Netherlands, Naples, Sicily, and the vast, uncharted lands of the Americas. It was said that the sun never set on his empire. From the gold of the New World to the cold rivers of the Danube, his power stretched farther than that of any king before him. But with inheritance came a burden greater than any crown. Charles wasn't just a ruler. He was a symbol of an age. The Holy Roman Empire, the Spanish kingdoms, the Austrian duchies, all under one man's seal. He became Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, the most powerful man on earth. Yet his throne stood on fragile foundations: alliances that could shatter with a single death, bloodlines that could fracture with a single betrayal. He inherited the faith of Spain, the politics of Austria, and the enemies of both. He faced the Protestant Reformation tearing Christendom apart, France threatening his borders, and the Ottomans pressing from the east. He was emperor of half the known world, but his empire was too vast to rule, too divided to hold, and too human to last. Imagine the scene. Charles V stands before a map of the world: Spain's empire in the west, Austria's domains in the east, the seas filled with ships carrying gold, silk, and faith. Every inch of it his, by birth, by fate, by the cunning of generations who married their way into history. But the same blood that united Europe would soon begin to poison it. Power breeds rivalry, and empires built on inheritance are destined to collapse under their own weight. As Charles watches the sun set on one of his countless kingdoms, he cannot know that he stands at the peak of Habsburg glory. From here, there is nowhere left to rise, only to fall. When Charles V inherited half the world, it looked like destiny. But destiny, like empire, always comes with a price. His rule stretched from the silver mines of the New World to the cold stones of Vienna, yet he could not sleep without hearing the world tearing itself apart. Too many crowns, too many wars, and beneath it all, too many enemies waiting for the moment his empire cracked. Charles V tried to hold the impossible together. He was Holy Roman Emperor, King of Spain, ruler of the Netherlands, Duke of Austria, and master of territories he would never even see. But power on that scale doesn't unite. It divides. In Germany, Martin Luther's Reformation was setting fire to the church Charles had sworn to defend. In France, King Francis I waged endless wars against him. Two monarchs locked in a rivalry that turned Europe into a battlefield. In the East, the Ottoman Empire under Suleiman the Magnificent thundered across Hungary and the Balkans, threatening Vienna itself. Charles fought everywhere and ruled nowhere. The dream of one Christian empire fractured beneath his own crown. In 1556, exhausted and broken by decades of war and betrayal, Charles did something no emperor had done before. He abdicated. He divided his empire like a dying god, cutting the world in two. His brother Ferdinand took the Austrian lands and the title of Holy Roman Emperor. His son Philip II inherited Spain, its colonies, and the heart of the Habsburg dream. As Charles retreated to a monastery to die in solitude, Philip took the throne of what was now the most powerful and most haunted empire on earth. Philip II was everything his father wasn't: cold, devout, relentless. Where Charles had ruled through diplomacy, Philip ruled through faith. He believed God himself had chosen him to defend Catholicism, and he acted like it. He built the Escorial, a palace monastery that looked less like a royal residence and more like a tomb. He spent his days surrounded by priests and generals, his nights signing decrees that would drag Spain into war after war. He crushed revolts in the Netherlands with fire and iron. He sent fleets to fight the Ottomans in the Mediterranean. And when Protestant England challenged his might, he built the Spanish Armada, the largest fleet the world had ever seen. But God did not calm the seas for Philip. Storms shattered his ships, and the proud Armada was destroyed. Spain's invincible power began to bleed away into the waves. Still, the Habsburg Empire seemed eternal. Austria, Spain, the New World, the Holy Roman Crown, all bound by the same blood. But that blood had begun to rot. Generations of marriages between cousins, nieces, and nephews, alliances meant to preserve the family's power, had twisted their lineage. The result was the Habsburg jaw, a physical mark of the dynasty's obsession with purity and control. It wasn't just a deformity, it was a curse made flesh. By the time of Charles II of Spain, the last of the Spanish Habsburgs, the dynasty's great experiment in empire had collapsed into a tragedy of genetics. Charles was sickly, sterile, and tormented, a living ghost of his ancestors' ambitions. When he died childless in 1700, he took the Spanish line of the Habsburgs with him. But Austria endured. Through centuries of war and reform, through the 30 Years' War that turned Europe into ash, the Habsburgs clung to power. They lost lands, gained others, changed crowns, but they never surrendered the idea that they were born to rule. Maria Theresa, the only female ruler in Habsburg history, would later rebuild the empire through sheer will. Her son Joseph, too, tried to modernize it. And when Napoleon rose from France to challenge the old order, it was another Habsburg daughter, Marie Antoinette, who married into tragedy in the French Revolution. Even as kingdoms burned, the Habsburg blood still ran through Europe's veins. By the 19th century, the empire had evolved into the Austro-Hungarian Empire, a vast mosaic of languages, cultures, and restless nations. Vienna was a city of music and marble, power and paranoia. But beneath its elegance, the empire was crumbling. The Habsburgs ruled over too many peoples, too many identities, and none truly loyal to them anymore. In 1914, one man's death would end it all. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Habsburg throne, was assassinated in Sarajevo. His death ignited World War I, and with it, the destruction of centuries of dynastic power. When the war ended, the empire was gone. The Habsburgs, the family that once owned half of Europe, were exiled, stripped of crowns, their castles turned to museums. Yet their shadow remains. They had ruled the continent longer than any other dynasty in European history. They had married kingdoms, built empires, and shaped the map of Europe for nearly 7 centuries. From the Alps to the Andes, from Vienna to Mexico City, the traces of their ambition still whisper through stone and blood. They prove that war isn't the only path to empire, that love, marriage, and patience can conquer more than armies ever could. But in the end, their own blood, the very thing that made them powerful, became the weapon that destroyed them. So when history says the Habsburgs ruled half of Europe, it's not just geography. It's a story of how one family turned inheritance into empire, and how that empire was undone, not by the sword, but by the weight of its own perfection. Let others wage war, they once said. You, happy Austria, marry. And for centuries, they did, until even love could not save them. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Also ensure to check out other stories from this channel. Thank you.